everyone, it's Leigh Diprose here from F-Stop Lounge, and I'm very excited as always. I've got the wonderful Colby Brown joining us from Denver, Colorado. Is that right, Colby?
That is, well, actually, technically, I live in Boulder, Colorado, but it's just outside Denver, but right
Cool.
there in the heart of the Rocky Mountains.
Man, that's just outside your doorstep. How often do you go to the Rocky Mountains? And yeah,
Sadly, it's not a lot actually, because I do so much international work. When I'm actually home here, I'm either working on business stuff or I'm actually with the family. So coincidentally, my portfolio actually of photography images from Colorado is actually pretty poor, just because I don't get out in my own backyard too much. But that being said, when I do, it is absolutely beautiful, and I do love living in Colorado. It's just yeah, nature of the beast. I need more hours in the day, essentially.
awesome, awesome. Well, for those people that haven't come across your work online, because you are prolific on Google Plus and a lot of other social networks out there, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started? I believe it was in 2006.
Yeah, that's correct. I got into photography initially more so out of an interest of traveling rather than actual photography. The only class I ever took when I was younger was like a middle school photography course that I was much more interested in football and girls at the time. So I don't think I paid attention much.
Yeah.
I remember processing her on film, but that's about the only thing I remember from the class. Um, but coming back to the story, I mean, in 2006, I just graduated from university. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I'd already kind of caught the travel bug when I was younger. Throughout university, I'd take like a year off or a semester off, go traveling. Actually, spent some time in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji, and Costa Rica, and all sorts of places, and just kind of really fell in love with the idea of traveling. And at that point in my life, I simply wanted to do something different. I decided that I wanted to keep traveling, and I had the pretty naive notion in the beginning, at least, that the best way to do that was probably just to become a photographer. I didn't know what that meant or what entailed. I didn't own a digital SLR before that. I had a small point and shoot digital camera, which was a little small 4.1 megapixel Kodak camera I took on some of my trips. But I kind of just jumped in head first, and yeah, overall, kind of ended up lucked out. A few years later, I was teaching photography for National Geographic in South America, and then things kind of spiraled from there. And here I am.
That's awesome, man. Now, I know for a lot of photographers when they first start out, they make tons of mistakes. And can you share with us? I know I'm sure you have made mistakes in your photography journey. Is there a standout one?
Oh goodness, standout. There's probably a couple standout ones. When I first started, as I mentioned, I was very naive, and I had very good intentions, but a lot of the business stuff, which is actually something I kind of champion these days, compared to a lot of other photographers. Like these days, I really love the business side of things. That took years of training and practice and making lots of mistakes. And while I don't necessarily have like a single individual point, I definitely remember having a not understanding the value of perception.
Hmm.
When I was first starting out, I was always trying to be very authentic, which was good and is something that I recommend doing. But that has to be with the caveat: you have to still be professional. You still have to put yourself out there in quite good light to your clients. You don't need to be fake by any means, but I think a lot of the time I took those initial opportunities that I had that I think mostly worked out in my favor, more so for granted, and I didn't take them as seriously or as professionally as I should have going into it in terms of working with clients, making sure clients are 1,000% happy, following up, things like that. Took a couple years of practice to really kind of get me to a happy place in terms of being comfortable with sitting in these days sitting in meeting rooms or boardrooms with heads of company and pitching them ideas and products and or projects and marketing campaigns. When I first started out, I was still doing those things or was starting to do those things, but I was not nearly as professional as I am today. So take your job
Yeah,
seriously is the advice of the day.
yeah, yeah.
Photography. I think a lot of time photographers think that or aspiring photographers want to believe in the notion that we just go out and shoot all the time, travel to beautiful places, and that's not necessarily the case. And in fact, that's actually once you get quite successful, you can do less and less of that. You generally find more and more financial success, but most of the time, I mean, if I'm out shooting maybe 5 or 10% of my time actually working, like awesome. The rest of the time, it's business meetings, it's all the other stuff. And like I said, for the longest time, I didn't really necessarily understand that, and so I didn't take it seriously. And because of that, I probably didn't leverage things early on as much as I should have, which could have sped up a lot of the process in terms of the first few years it really took for me to get a hold of my brand and to really actually start bringing in some money to
Yep.
realistically be able to do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just your history and where you've come from to where you are now, you've got a, a plethora of brands that you represent, like including f-stop, you've got Enduro, you've done some recent work for LG and Sony as well. But can you just tell us a little bit about how, I suppose, your business mind works and how it sort of evolved, how it evolved really into what is now the Giving Lens? Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, sure. So let's just take that in kind of two parts. We'll do the
Mm.
business side first, and then we'll transition into TGL. So for the business side of things, something that I've been able to use to my advantage for the last 9 years now of doing this is that I've always learned the value, or probably understood the value of thinking ahead. I think a lot of photographers think very short term. They're always thinking contract to contract. It's like, oh, I need to make, $4,000 on this one contract, or I need to do this. Whereas I'm trying to think 10 steps ahead. I'm not only thinking of who I want to work with now and the projects I want to work with in the next 4 to 6 months. I'm thinking maybe 24 months down the line where I want to be, where I want my brand to be, what peripheral things I want to have in terms of like newsletter numbers or other products and services I want to develop, where I'm trying to find synergy points of value for every single thing that I do. Um, and when I was early on, as I mentioned a second ago, I didn't fully think all these things through, but I had it in the back of my mind where it's like, okay, I want to do this, but what does this actually mean? If I take this job or if I take this opportunity, how can I leverage that? And I think a lot of people, a lot of photographers fail to do that. They're not cognitively thinking of finding more value out of something rather than, like I said, just that short-term gain. Usually, a short-term financial gain, where it's like, oh, if I work for this company, I can make $2,000. In my head, I'm like, okay, well, $2,000 doesn't mean that much in the big scheme of things. But if I can turn this project into a $15,000 or $25,000 project, I can pitch to the same company a year from now or a year and a half from now after I've severely impressed them doing something here at a price I'm not necessarily usually comfortable with, but it gives me the opportunity to develop that relationship. Then I'm going to be more interested in doing those type of projects compared to other ones that might be very big payoffs, but they're one-time deals. And to me, that just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. I don't want to constantly be fighting for work. That's never a fun part of business. A lot of photographers think that, or not just photographers, a lot of entrepreneurs think that when you start working for yourself, you don't have a boss. You're your own boss. It's all this.
Mm.
It's this wonderful idea. The reality is that when you do start working for yourself, you don't have one boss. You have maybe 100 bosses for a year because you're working on 100 different projects. And so, because of that, you really have to think more creatively in terms of learning to leverage every single thing that you do, every single asset that you deliver to a client. I'm very particular on like the copyright or the usage rights of everything that I do, so that I make sure if I'm working for a project and say I'm getting paid $35,000 for a marketing campaign, I'm going to make sure that all the assets I develop for this campaign, where I'm making maybe $25,000 in profit because I have overhead expenses, um, I can also leverage all those assets to further that and maybe make another 20 by pitching the same type of content to other companies or other ideas, or leveraging it in my books or video tutorials or whatever it is. And yeah, so initially that all of that stuff when I was first starting out, this first few years was slowly building and building until I got to a pinnacle point where all of a sudden I had much more sway and control over who I worked with, what I charged, and essentially now I'm in a position where I only work on projects and work with companies I want to. I turn down probably not 9 out of 10, maybe about 7 out of 10 different companies out there for people that are pitching ideas because I just don't have time. Where I really want to put myself into um, almost like passion projects. I want to work on stuff that I believe in, whether it's a product, a service, a destination. Um, and these days, it's nice to be in that place, but it took a while to get there. And so that was a really both interesting lesson for me, as well as a fun progression to get to the point where I was always kind of thinking ahead, and eventually that mindset paid off, and
Yeah.
allowed me to now forge my own future and figure out where I want to go, and decide my own fate and what I get paid and how much I make every year, depending on how much I work. Whereas when we first start off, um, we're taking everything we can get. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
that's
someone
right.
pitched me an idea. I'm going to take 10 projects this month because that's going to be awesome and I'll make lots of money. And then all of a sudden you're exhausted by the end, and halfway through you're like, why did I do this? But the
And you
next
don't
month
see
you
your
do the same
family.
thing and you
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
doing it. Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
I have a young family. And
yeah.
so yeah, so that was very interesting for me. Um, yeah, as a quick example, before we segue to TGL, I just wanted to bring up um, the idea of Android. I always like using this as a great example. So most of the creative world, as you know, are very Apple centric.
Hmm.
I myself use Apple products for from probably 2000 till about 2010 and maybe 2011. And ultimately, I ended up switching for two reasons. One, I was getting a little bit bored, just a personal preference with iOS and OS X and what they were doing. Um, but the other side of it was actually a business plan. And I say this because if everyone in your field is using a specific product or a specific company, and at the time, and even now, Apple's very restrictive on who they work with and what they do in terms of marketing. Um, I'd much rather go against the grain in terms of what everyone else is doing and try to find opportunities in the other companies that are out there trying to make a name for themselves. So when I decided to switch from using the iPhone to using an Android device back in the day, at first Android wasn't as good as it is today, so it was actually a little bit clunky and whatnot. But that gave me the opportunity to start having conversations and start having meetings with people at Google. And before I knew it, I was having candid conversations with Hugo Bear at the time, who was the vice president of Android. And that led to projects that I worked with Motorola and Samsung and HTC and Oppo and LG, as you just talked about. Like the idea that I switched from using Apple products to changing back to Windows and Android. I've probably made uh, three or $400,000 over the last few years on various different contracts for various different companies because I saw an opportunity, and I sit there and said, okay, everyone's doing this. If I go over here, I can stand out a heck of a lot easier. And by doing so, that gave me those business opportunities, and then it was up to me to cultivate them, to make something of them. But if I didn't make that switch, I would have not only been out on that money, I would have been out on all those different projects and all the different connections that I have now. Where I've written a book on Android photography, I constantly work with these different companies, and it's become a very lucrative aspect of my businesses. Mobile photography, which I didn't necessarily plan on, but I was very um, cognitive. I was thinking very creatively about the situation of the industry, what was happening, what opportunities were there, and then I played my cards and saw what happened. Now it might not have played out, it might not have worked out, and it doesn't always work out. But it is good to think about what everyone else is doing and try to figure out your own pathway. You'll
Yep,
have much
yep.
less resistance. You'll have much less competition. And at the end of the day, at least for me in my experience, not only for Android, but a lot of the other lessons I've learned over the years, it really opened my eyes to the value of um, not just having Me Too products or being a Me Too photographer. If I'm a photographer and I'm like 1,000 other people, or 10,000 other people these days is probably more accurately, then I'm gonna have a much harder time making money or finding jobs or getting hired. Whereas if I can do something a little bit different, whatever that small niche might be, I'm going to learn to capitalize it and kind of take it to the next level.
Yeah. And before you head over into the
Yeah.
TGL, um, it's interesting you know when you said Android was clunky in the beginning. I just want to tell all the iPhone users out there, it's not the camera that takes the photo, it's the photographer.
For
You know,
sure.
you just look at digital revs challenges of the the cheap camera challenge, and it doesn't matter what the camera is. You know, it's the photographer that takes a photo. And I had Android back in the day, and I was taking photos on Android over my iPhone because I just enjoyed the experience, and that
Yep.
was just something I enjoyed, and that followed through into passion. So yeah,
Awesome.
I'll hand it back to you with TGL.
For sure. Yeah. So TGL stands for the Giving Lens for everyone listening that doesn't know. And the Giving Lens it started out as an idea for myself to offer ways for photographers to tangibly give back to companies, or not, I mean, to locations, to communities, to countries we visit, in a meaningful way. Like, as a travel photographer, I found myself early on traveling to many different beautiful exotic locations and maybe spending a little bit of money in country, but I never necessarily knew where that money was going. Maybe I donated a little bit of time here and there, but it didn't really make much of a difference. I really didn't really truly understand the challenges that we're facing a lot of these different issues out there, child education and women's rights and all that fun, all that interesting thing, all the interesting issues that plague the world. And so TGL came out of that frustration of not knowing how to help or where to start. And I felt that a lot of other photographers were in my same boat, where they wanted to do something with their talents. They wanted to find a way to have the creative art form of photography make a difference, but they didn't know how to apply it. And so the Giving Lens was born in 2011. And essentially, what we do is every year, um, we take 6 to 10, depending on the year, trips around the world to very specific countries to work with very specific organizations, NGOs, and charities that champion very specific causes. That could be clean drinking water projects, species preservation, women's rights, child education, young women affected by the sex slave trade in Asia, all different causes. And what we do is we take generally 8 to 10 different participants from around the world that have various different skill sets in photography. We have professional photography instructors there with us, and they teach our participants as well as our participants work hand in hand in the local communities with the local NGOs in meaningful ways. And sometimes that is directly photography related. Sometimes we're helping a youth education program, like we have actually running right now in Nicaragua with Empowerment International, where we're helping them further develop out their photography program that is an extracurricular activity towards their supplemental income that's happening, that they're working in conjunction with the schools to keep the
Wow.
kids out of drugs and
Yep.
have them give them some sort of opportunity outside of the life of the barrios that they live in. Two, it could be washing elephants in Asia, to working hand in hand with women's programs in East Africa. Essentially, we have a very organic approach to when we connect with an organization. We don't come in and say, this is what we do. We come in and say, how can we help?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that helps us develop very unique trips where every single one of our trips is different. Like, we have a lot of people, because of the idea of what we're doing is very unique, where we have a lot of alumni take a lot of our different trips. And every single time they're like, this is different than the last 3 that I took, or the last one that I was on, or everything that I heard about, because every single trip has those different needs, and every different organization and cause has different challenges. And then at the same time, oops, excuse me.
Yeah.
um, at the same time, each of the different trips actually also act as a fundraiser. And so what happens is that typically up to about 50% of the profits from each of the different trips that we do, we actually donate back to the organizations and to the communities that we're working in. And so that's where the tangible benefit comes back after the stuff that we're doing on the ground, that is very impactful, that is very meaningful, talking to families with HIV, staying in the barrios with these families to know what it's like, rather than just being a tourist passing by through a slum area and you're like, oh, that looks challenging. Like, going in there, talking to people, looking at realistic problems and how they solve them, trying to figure out ways that we can help. Where the financial aspect comes back at the end, where, okay, we've understand what's going on, we can figure out how we can help. We're going to make a donation based on those needs to maybe help build a school, or whatever those needs might be.
Wow, that's amazing.
So it's been
Yeah.
fun. It's been really interesting seeing it take off from the idea to a tangible organization.
Mm.
And yeah, now like I said, we run trips in places like Nicaragua and Peru and Thailand and Cambodia, Tanzania. We have one coming up in August. We're expanding out to Morocco and Ethiopia and all sorts of different places. There's
Wow.
a lot of great things happening out there, and lots of great issues that need help, and that need people to advocate for them, and need their stories told. And so we're trying to affect many of those issues around the world, in terms of photography helping amplify these stories and these amazing organizations and communities and challenges all through that artistic medium, which is quite interesting and quite addictive to kind of see it grow.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. And the interesting thing is, this organization you built, it's really, I suppose, one of those passion projects
Yeah.
that you talked about earlier. I'm sure it took a lot of time to invest into this, organization to build it where it is, and you've had a lot of help from a lot of photographers to do that. But hats off to you, Colby. You've done a great thing for the world.
Thank you very much. And it's,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, quickly coming back to the passion project, I mean, it's so important to do those type of things. I especially, I always like to give, especially emerging and aspiring photographers, that type of, the advice. I mean, I think a lot of it's fairly cliche because a lot of people say it, do things that you love. Like, it's a
yeah.
nice romantic idea. It's very easy to say. It's much more difficult to put into practice.
That's right.
But I remember, so I was fortunate. I think we mentioned earlier, like 3 years after picking up my first camera, I was teaching photography for National Geographic student expeditions in South America. And before I got that job, or just before, when I was doing like orientation for the leader training for everything that we're doing, I remember meeting a handful of National Geographic photographers. And the common thread that I found between all of them was that all of them got a name for themselves or got recognized in some way that ultimately spurred or elevated their career to help them get to where they are today because they picked up a passion project like that. It wasn't done for the money. TGL, I don't make anything from TGL. Essentially, it pays for itself. It pays its own taxes, and I pay my employees and the instructors, but I don't make anything from it. The idea was simply there's a need. This is something I'm passionate about. How can I create something that is sustainable, that allows it to kind of live on its own, and to make a difference, of course. And by doing so, that really, of course, has helped elevate my own brands. It wasn't the idea behind it. It wasn't a self-serving project. It was something I just really wanted to do. And if for other people out there, if you can find those type of things, not only will you be happier with your work, but you never know quite where it will lead you. And so that's why these days, especially with social media and all the other photographers and people that I see getting popular on Instagram and Snapchat and all these kind of new mediums or new platforms for photographers to establish themselves. I really hope that a lot of these people that I see doing it are taking that seriously, where it's like, okay, yes, I may be able to make a career out of this, and that's awesome. But how can I also use this to do something that I absolutely love to do and see
Yep.
where it takes them? Because I
Yeah.
promise you that like I said, every single the thread between all the different Nat Geo photographers that all of us aspired to want to be when we were younger, when we started getting interested in photography, every single person I talked to had one of those passion projects that took time, that took their own money, it took blood, sweat, and tears, but eventually it paid off. But that wasn't the idea. It wasn't like I'm going to do this to make a career. It's like I'm going to do this because it's important, and
Yeah, that's right.
because it makes me feel good about trying to make that difference, or whatever it is.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely look into passion stuff, because passion and inspiration are the most powerful tools, or most powerful aspects of what we do as the human species.
Yeah. And that's great advice, Colby. So thanks for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Um, Now, another passion of yours is teaching.
Yes.
You've got a myriad of knowledge expanding over the years of your career, and you're just so willing to share it. And you've got some videos coming up. Is that right? That you're working on at the
Yeah.
moment? Yep.
Yeah. For the longest time, I've taught workshops all over the globe, all the fun places: Iceland, Japan, East Africa, all sorts of stuff. But I've never really taken the time to fully flesh out the idea of doing video tutorials or ebooks, things like that. I've written a handful of books, proper publications you get like Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or wherever your local big bookstore is. But the idea of digital content that people can consume, and to help elevate them at their own pace at a much more affordable level. Not everyone can come to Iceland with me for $4,000. Like, I totally understand that. It's just an expensive place to work, so unfortunately I have to charge that much. But it's just not the case for everyone.
Yeah.
And so putting together a handful of tutorials, Lightroom presets, ebooks, all of these things. I have a ton of stuff coming out over the next few months. Some coming up really quickly, others spread out through the end of the year. That will all continue to amplify, continue to expand out, where people that are interested in wildlife photography, the landscape photography, to travel portraits, all sorts of things, will have a multitude of different opportunities to check out different things that might help elevate your own skill sets based on your own passions, rather than just focusing on here's just a Lightroom tutorial. Like there's thousands of
Yeah.
those out there. I
Yeah.
want to help you realize your vision, and by doing so, I'll be mixing some stuff out in the field, as well as post processing, to really kind of help you, like I said, harness the idea that you go out, you shoot, you know what you want to do with, and then when you get back to the post processing stage, you're like, okay, I know what tools I have, I know what pieces I can put together, but you have a idea of where to go with it. And so, so pretty soon I'm going to have a ton of different stuff out there.
That's great. That's awesome. Now, I know that workshops are where you've come from, and I'm very excited to say that you're part of the 8 instructors coming along to the Fiji Photography Workshop. And can you just explain to people listening what sort of differences you see when you're teaching someone out in the field and giving them practical experience, as opposed to someone just sitting watching a YouTube video?
Absolutely. No, there definitely is a difference. And that's, again,
Yeah.
why I focused mostly on the infield stuff for the last 9 years. I think a lot of people are active or engaged learners,
Mm-hmm.
and it's much easier to retain information when you're touching it with your hands, when you're out there and you're in the moment, and you're working, like in this case, with an instructor to kind of help you pull all these pieces together. You're looking at composition, you're looking at the field, you're looking at the light and the reflections and everything. It's always, I found it to be a much more immersive experience that I think truly allows people to really step things up much quicker than if you are just sitting back and looking at YouTubes and things like that. I think they complement each other, but I think it really can't compare to being out in the field. Same thing for me when I first started out. If I was out in the field, that's how I learned. And
Yep.
I think a lot of people are the same way. And that's one of the, that mixed in with, even coming back to the affordability. I know we talked about workshops being expensive. The reason I got excited about doing this Fiji workshop with FSOP Lounge, as well as the other instructors we have, is because it was actually created to be so affordable. You don't hear of a workshop in a place like Fiji to essentially come out like this. And to me, even coming back to TGL, like that's why we do TGL. We offer them much more affordably because we
Yeah.
want more people to learn. Obviously, at the end of the day, companies still have to make money. But if we can mitigate that and we can focus our attention on providing the best education in the best location, in the best situation, I think it's a win-win for everyone. And it's
Yep.
been, last time I was in Fiji was 2003, and so I've been dying to get back. And, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. I actually learned to scuba dive there. And all the other instructors we have here for this trip are actually all world class. And so it was an honor being part of this group that is going to do this kind of unique take on essentially like a symposium, a workshop symposium, where it's multiple different people from multiple different skill sets, all providing a variety of different educational approaches, as well as content, all in a single location for a couple day, kind of high intensive, great energy, great location, and I'm hoping to get a little bit more of a tan as well. So
yeah, that's right. Well, you're gonna have to don that, the famous beanie.
I know, right? Well,
Yeah.
I get the reflectiveness, so it's I'm gonna use it as a reflector if I forget to bring mine.
Perfect.
We're right on that rock. I just got to angle my head.
That's it. Well, I just wanted to thank you for coming, to Fiji and being available to teach, because I know that so many people want to learn from you, and it's really exciting to have you as part of the team there. And I'm really looking forward to personally learning from you as well. So it's going to be a great experience. So thanks for that.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Yeah. So just in, I suppose, ballpark figure, the next 5 years, where do you see yourself? This sounds like a job interview now.
I know. I like it. That's a good question. Yeah, coming back to our forward-thinking, aspects talking earlier. In 5 years from now, it's interesting as my brands have grown. My not my approach, my mindset has changed, and being in the position I am now, where, as we were talking about earlier, I get to work for the companies I want to work with, and create the content, and I'm been very, very lucky, very fortunate and lucky, and all that great stuff to be in a position where I am.
And a lot of hard work.
And a lot of hard work, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all a mixture. It's all a bit of piece of that, opportunities
Yeah.
and all sorts of things. Where my focus changed solely from business development to family. So I have a 4-year-old son. Actually turns 4 August 22nd.
Wow.
Name's Jack, and my wife, who we've been married for 5 years this year. We're my goal has always been, well, in the back of my mind has always been, is now coming more to fruition, to essentially build up a, if you want to call it, a mini empire, or essentially brands and companies, to get to a position where a lot of them are running themselves, or at least are sustainable to a point where I can spend more time with my family. And so 5 years from now, I want to be in a position where all these different revenue streams that I've built up, the tutorials, the workshops, the marketing campaigns, all this stuff is spread out and balanced enough where my family can come with me on as many of these trips around the world as possible. Like, that's my goal as a human being and as a proud parent, is to show the world to my son, to be able to show him the challenges and the realities and the contrast ways of life of people living in Africa, to Chile, to Mongolia, to Australia, and to really give him the opportunity to learn what he wants from it, what he takes from it, but to provide him those opportunities that I didn't necessarily have when I was younger, because my family just didn't travel much. And so 5 years from now, yeah, that's where I want to be. I want to be in a position where at least once a year, we talked about this with my son already. Once a year during the summertime, I'm going to take a month off work, and essentially we're going to dedicate that month to traveling in a single country. So that's going to maybe be Chile, or Colombia, or Tanzania, or Kenya, or wherever it is. That whole month is dedicated towards really ingraining ourselves with the culture in these different places, understanding what it's like to live there, understanding what, the challenges and the opportunities and the beautiful things, as well as some of the negative side, to really kind of hopefully open up my son's eyes to what I consider the realities of the world. And if I can do that, beyond anything else in any of the other business stuff where I'd like to be, that makes me a happy person. Like, that's my driving force as an individual, as a businessman, as a photographer, as an artist, as a father, and as a husband, is to focus that all these things, all these moving parts that I have developed over the last 9 years and will continue to develop moving forward, or all kind of getting to that synergy point where things like the Giving Lens now essentially run on its own. I have an operations manager. I have a handful of people that do it. I run 1 or 2 trips a year if I can. Most of the time, the rest of the time, it's running on its own. It's become its own entity. And if I can do the same thing with everything I do, then that frees up time for me to spend my time more appropriately with the most important people in the world to me, which is my family.
Well, that's a brilliant thing, Colby, and good luck for the future with that. And on that note, if I can give you some advice for the first month, maybe visit the Rockies.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have 5 years to make it happen. I'm going to do it.
Yeah, go camping for a month.
Absolutely. I like that idea.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Colby Brown, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you in Fiji in person. And if you can give one last piece of advice on why someone should come to Fiji, what would it be?
Oh, besides my charming personality, like I said, I think the biggest thing for me for Fiji, why it's unique from everything else, is because of all the talent that we're going to have there. People like myself and Tony Hewitt and Benjamin Von Wong, like, we all have different approaches. We all have different styles. And most of the time, again, you're taking a single workshop with one of us in some cool location, and you're getting our take on things. But I think it's always helpful to kind of see counterpoints of view, to see counter approaches to how everything happens, to what other artists look to and envision I think because we all have different backgrounds, I'm excited even to learn from other instructors that are there. Like that's the beauty of art, is that we're always learning, and to be in a position or in a place like Fiji on this beautiful island, in this beautiful scene, surrounded by all these different types of artists, all these different,
Mm.
iconic individuals, I think is a real treat and something
Yeah.
that's very special. Something I never had the ability to have when I was first starting out, but would have loved to been able to um, find an opportunity like that where I wasn't fixating on a single type of photography or a single approach, but really getting an expansive view
Mm.
over the entire spectrum of art, of photography in general, rather than just landscape or just portrait or whatever it is. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Yeah, the food's going to be good too. So that's always
That's it. That's it.
good.
Well, I really look forward to seeing those rocky images.
Yeah,
And on that
absolutely.
note, thank you very much, and I'll catch you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.